Hello and welcome to the Unofficial Shifted Lands Guide 102. In this episode, our goal is to dive into player resources, explain the 4 fundamental pools of skill that underpin most skills in Shifted Lands, and take a look at the playable races within the LARP. My name is Solomon, and let's dive into character creation. Boom. So I will actually be skipping a lot of this page as the order in which I'm going to explain character creation doesn't exactly align with the text here in the rulebook. Which, if you wish to dive into this yourself, I highly recommend looking through this whole thing. But at first, we are going to skip the quick build guide, which is up here, and go right to the first major decision that you have to make that isn't your character race. The reason I'm showing you this first is because I feel that the resource system has a bit of weight in regards to what you might choose as your race before you actually pick the race. Um, so let's dive into priorities. With priorities, there are 3 sections, and you get to value them at A, B, or C. The 3 sections are race, skills, and resources, and they're laid out on the table here in this website. Taking a look at this table, you might see a word called build here. Uh, Build essentially amounts to an experience point type of system, and each skill costs a certain amount of build to get on your character sheet. You might see that there's also racial build. That only exclusively exists within this priority system. As soon as you get into game, it's just called generic build. And that's part of the reason why I want to express this chart here first before we go over the races. So essentially with this chart, you have to prioritize what you want for your character out of the gate. Here I've written up a little example in MS Paint to kind of express what I feel are the 3 main routes that people go. Technically, this is a 3x3 chart, so you have a possible 9 variations here, I think, but these are the most common in my understanding. Also, these are not ranked in any particular order, so 1 is not better than 3 or vice versa, it's just different options. So let's look over number 1 here. In this example, someone is prioritizing their racial skills as the most important thing. And when you dig into the races, you'll see that not all races are the same in terms of the number of skills. So one race might have 5 racial abilities, and another race might have the possibility of 30 racial abilities. So depending on what race you're looking at, if you wanted to walk into the first game with all of your racial skills, you might have to prioritize differently. So that's why this particular row is picking race A. Uh, then we have skill at B, which shows us that this character wants to have a decent amount of build into their skills. So someone like this might be a fighter or a warrior type who wants to buy attack skills, or maybe someone like a dwarf who wants to be a good apprentice artisan when they come into game. Either way, they want a good amount of generic build so they can develop their non-racial skills. And then finally, we have wealth at C. So this kind of assumes that either you don't really prioritize in-game currency, or you plan to use your skills regularly to acquire said currency, and you don't plan on relying on getting regular money at logistics, which is the opportunity cost of not putting resources at A or B. Wealth not only represents money, but it can also be used to get other stuff like item tags and recipes and stuff. So for a warrior type, they would use most of their wealth to purchase armor, a basic couple weapons, and maybe a shield, and not much else. With 20 wealth, you're not really getting a whole lot of else. You want a lot of your you would want a lot of your wealth to be going into armor points, which I think caps at 200. So this might be a little bit rough for a dwarf crafter who wanted to be like an alchemist or something, because that means you only get like 4 recipes here. Um, as wealth can be used to purchase like production items, and you're probably also going to want a sword and so like some kind of small piece of armor as well. So that really kind of hampers your ability to get your artisan stuff going. Looking at row number 2 now, we see that this is a much better layout for a crafter type of character, as they prioritize wealth A here, and they have their skills at C. So 30 skill build, which is what you get for putting skills at C, for someone going into a artisan crafting type of character is totally fine. Most apprentice skill sets, I believe, only cost like 2 build, and you're mostly going to rely on other people for the heavy combat stuff, so this is an okay choice. Definitely a case to be made to bump skill up to B here, but that's essentially what row number 3 is. Summing up row number 2, this is someone who wants to do a lot with their racial skills and embody their race in roleplay, and someone who wants to be kind of a crafter as well. Having wealth at A also means that you're going to walk in with 10 copper a game or 1 silver, which is super useful when you want to be purchasing crafting materials to do your in-game skill stuff. Row number 3, this I would definitely define as the spellcaster row. So in this example, they have also taken wealth at A, and this is because they want a lot of spells in their book when they start the game. Each spell put into your spell book is 2 wealth, so a dagger and some armor would be maybe like 4 wealth. Doing the math after subtracting the dagger and the armor looks about to be like 28 spells in your spellbook, which is super good. You will have the chance to really pick and choose some of the spells you really want to specialize in, as having a complete spellbook isn't too much of a priority for most spellcasters. Most spellcasters I've met in game really focus on casting 1 or 2 really good spells and then doing those really easily, which when you dive into some of the more advanced spellcasting stuff, you'll find that the game mechanics kind of incentivize that. So actually thinking about it, wealth A is kind of overkill here. In addition to this, they have skill at B, which allows them to grab the required skills able to cast magic, which is only like 1 or 2 skills. And then the rest of their build they can put straight into a specific pool of magic, which is essentially just resources you use to cast spells. So summing up row 3, you have someone who wants to be a spellcaster and then really have a lot of pool or resources to cast throughout the game. And then they place their racial skills at C so they can pick up maybe just the skills that they like best from their chosen race. Alright, cool. We've gotten through the priority section, and hopefully that wasn't too confusing for anyone following along. If you were a bit confused or didn't catch much of what I was explaining, definitely take the time to read through this page in detail, as this page will more thoroughly explain the system to you, and there are lots of examples on the page to express the type of character you might want to play. Now that I've kind of explained pool while talking about row 3, I feel that the concept of pool is something we should cover here, as it's very fundamental to the core rulebook of ShiftedLands. This is really the meat and bones of how the whole skill system works here, and I've drawn up this example on MS Paint to better express what each of the pools are, as they cover both spellcasting and fighting skills. The 4 fundamental pools that this LARP revolves around are Weapon Mastery, Knavery, Spirit, and Sorcery. Weapon Mastery and Knavery are both combative fighting skills, meant for warrior types, and Spirit and Sorcery are both for spellcasters or mage types. A pool is really just your character's resources that they expend to use their abilities. For fighters, this is something like their endurance or stamina, and for mages, this is like the well of magic within themselves that they can pull out. Pool is a 1-to-1 ratio to build, so 1 point of build can be spent to have 1 point of pool on your character sheet. Pool is generally not shared between each of the 4 main types, so putting build into Knavery does not allow you to expend pool for Weapon Mastery. This is fundamental to how you will be developing your character as you progress. I highly recommend you specialize your character into one of these pools for your first few games to really grasp the advantages and disadvantages of your given pool before expending build into additional pools. For those of you who are crafter types or interested in psionics, there are 2 additional pools, respectively called production and psionic endurance, which we will dive into later as they are not as core to the rulebook as these 4 main pools. But rest assured, there are entire character archetypes within these 2 pools. A quick side note, these pools that we've seen so far are referred to as lower pools. There are things called upper pools, but that isn't within the realm of your first few games, and it really opens up a lot of extra headache that you don't need to worry about. Now we will start to dive into the specifics of a given pool. First, we will cover weapon mastery and knavery together, as they are very similar in a lot of ways. They are very much like two sides of the same coin. Each of these pools has a generic defensive and offensive ability that they have 4 different types of. These are basic, skilled, advanced, and master. Here, I will kind of speak to experience and suggest that the vast majority of what you end up seeing in battle is either the basic skill or the master skill. Skilled and advanced ranks are typically reserved for specific situations, at least on the defensive side of things. On the offensive side of things, skilled and advanced ranks are okay, but not nearly as common as the master skill typically. In regards to the main differences between weapon mastery and knavery, while having similar skills, what they each can do is very different and goes back to the coin example. Weapon mastery's main advantage is that it can attack anywhere on the body from any direction. So if you're fighting a monster head on, you can apply all your offensive damage without worrying about where you're landing your attacks. On the knavery side of the coin, their offensive damage must be landed from behind the opponent. Combat marshals will explain the exact rulings of what counts as behind when they introduce you to the combat, but keep in mind that knavery's offensive skills must typically be landed from behind, which, speaking from experience, can be a big disadvantage in a lot of the combats you'll encounter. However, on the defensive side of things, you will find the opposite advantages and disadvantages as previously laid out. Knavery can expend its defensive skills to defend from any direction, anywhere they are hit on the body, while weapon mastery may only expend their defensive skills from the front. So weapon mastery has a weakness if you can attack them from behind, while as knavery users have complete defensive capabilities regardless of direction. This gives both weapon mastery and knavery distinct personalities when it comes to creating a character. Knavery is for tricky rogues or defensive fighters, while weapon mastery is for barbarian types or straightforward warriors. Both knavery and weapon mastery have one unique skill that are distinct to their pool. Knavery has waylay. Waylay is a skill that allows you to render someone unconscious with a quick attack from behind, essentially knocking someone out from behind in an ambush style attack. Weapon mastery has stunning blow, which essentially stuns the opponent and renders them unable to defend themselves or use skills. Note, this does not prevent them from moving, and they are free to run away, but they may not physically block your attacks, i.e., they can't move their shield or their sword when you swing at them, which makes them kind of a sitting duck. Looking at the pinnacle of each of these pools will reveal that they both have an attack that can bring an opponent to death instantly. Weapon mastery has Slay, which is very simple. It is a single weapon blow that immediately brings your opponent to the death state if you hit them. Knavery has Death Blow, which works exactly like Slay, however it has the limitation of having to be struck from behind the opponent, just like all the other Knavery attacks. Staying just at the lower pools, the only way to defend against these skills are with the master defensive skills respectively, i.e., a basic deflect will not stop a death blow, but a master deflect will stop a death blow. There are other solutions to defend yourself against these attacks, mainly in the upper pools or with some magic defenses. However, we will not go into any of these as they are within the realm of the upper pools. Just know that there are more master skills to defend there are more than master skills to defend yourself against these attacks. Moving on to the magic skills, this is where things get a little more interesting and a little more complicated. Spellcasting does not involve individual skill usage. Instead, each spellcaster is equipped with a tome, or spellbook, containing a list of spells that they may cast by expending their pool. So this means that a spellcaster is free to spend more build into the size of their pool versus spending build on individual skills, which is a cool advantage of being a spellcaster. The two spellcasting pools are Spirit and Sorcery. To cast a spell requires that you are carrying your spellbook somewhere on your person. This could be in a bag, pouch, backpack, etc. In addition to this, the spell you're casting must be inside your spellbook. You must then recite the specific incantation for the spell and expend an amount of sorcery or spirit pool that is equal to the rank of the spell. For example, a rank 1 spell costs 1 pull to cast, and a rank 10 spell costs 10 pull to cast. Each spell has a unique effect and is defined by a specific sphere of magic. Later on, you'll be able to specialize within certain spheres to cast spells of that sphere at a reduced cost. This page here in the rulebook, underneath the spells section, is super useful to understanding how spells specifically work, and I highly recommend thoroughly reading this page if you wish to be a spellcaster. Now, let's get into the identity of each of the pools. When you think of sorcery, you should envision pointy hats, wizards, object manipulation, and magic shields and armor. The 4 spheres of sorcery are as follows: charm, elements, force, and mana. Each of these spheres has a unique theme that all of the spells within the sphere typically follow. I won't get into all the spells as that's part of the fun of reading the rulebook itself. However, I will point out a couple of sorcery spells that I see cast all the time. Those are Detect Magic, Grant Repel Weapon, Grant Battle Armor, Inflict Sleep, and Summon Fireball. Speaking from experience, I think hands down the best spell you could get as an entry-level sorcery mage is Grant Repel Weapon. Feel free to grab other spells, but I feel like you just can't go wrong with Repel Weapon. Moving on to Spirit. When you think of Spirit, you should envision druids, shamans, necromancers, life, and death. Within Spirit, there are 3 spheres: chaos, neutral, and nature. Spirit has a lot to do with the in-game healing spells, and a lot of their spells focus on the difference between the opposing forces of nature and chaos. They also have unique spells within the neutral sphere for effects like Shun, which keeps the target 10 feet away from the caster. They also have one of the best defenses in the LARP, Grant Blink Spirit, which, speaking from experience, is really good. Some of the most common spells I see cast from the Spirit side are Grant Life, Inflict Death, Create Circle Spirit, Shun, Grant Blink Spirit, and Cause and Cure Light Wounds, respectively. I think for Spirit, a good place to start with spells would be Grant Life, Cure Light Wounds, and Shun. With the 4 main pools out of the way, we can finally talk about the 2 additional pools of skill, Production and Psionic Endurance. First, we'll take a look at psionics, because they are in effect very similar to spells. However, just like the fighting skills, each individual psionic ability is a skill. So unlike magic casters who carry a spellbook instead of having skills, psionicists must spend build on each skill respectively. Most of the psionic skills available are almost copy-paste of individual spell effects from the magic section, but have the ability of being cast as a psionic. Psionics are inherently difficult to defend against, as there are the least amount of defenses for them commonly. You cannot deflect a psionic attack with a sword, and you cannot defend yourself with magic except for the previously mentioned Grant Blink Spirit spell. Some examples of psionic skills are as follows: Psionic Inflict Sleep, Psionic Inflict Mute, Psionic Grant Awakening, and Psionic Blast. Psionics also have a few unique abilities in the form of Psionic Consciousness and Psionic Endurance Thief. There is also an additional form of psionics called Zen, and we are going to skip past that. Now we will quickly cover artisan skills as a whole. Artisan crafting revolves around the production points pool. To craft items requires you to expend production points over a period of time defined by how many production points you are expending. So the more production you use, the longer it takes to accomplish the given task. There are currently 10 different production-based skill sets, and you can find individual details about them by clicking on their page. In regards to production points, you do not need to spend build on unique pools for each of these crafts. They all expend the same pool of production points. For example, that means if you have 25 production points, you can expend them both on brewing and alchemy. Each of these artisan trades have their respective place in the LARP. However, as a new player, I would highly recommend starting with either alchemy, brewing, medicine man, or runesmith, as these will see the most immediate impact in your first game. Lots of characters end up picking up an apprenticeship in 1 or 2 of these artisan skills, even if they are not a dedicated craftsman, as just having these skills brings a lot of utility. Artisan crafts are defined by a unique skill tree that is similar across all the artisan skills. These are apprentice, journeyman, and master. Apprentice and journeyman may be taught and learned like all the other normal skills, with the exception that journeymen cannot teach apprentices how to become journeymen. To become a master in a given craft involves finding 3 already existing masters and sitting through a teaching session as if they were teaching you the skill normally. Each time you find a master and they teach you, you get their master signature on your character sheet. To become a master, you must collect 3 different master signatures. These masters can be either real players or NPCs. Artists and craftsmen often spend a lot of time in their local taverns sitting and talking with other players. Often these individuals are the center of a lot of roleplay opportunities. Even if you don't intend to become an artisan, make sure to introduce yourself to a few craftsmen, as often they have handy solutions to your problems you run into, and will commonly buy a lot of the stuff you find on your adventures. This has been an Unofficial Shifted Lands Guide 102. Next video, we will dive straight into the races of the game and explore all the various cool stuff they do. Thank you for your time, and have a good day.